The silver gleamed under candlelight. But the room felt cold. Sterling Bancroft sat at the head of his dining table. Autumn harvest spread before him like tribute. Roasted venison, fresh bread, preserves in crystal jars. His guests' landowners all nodded as he spoke, their agreement as polished as the silverware. Homesteaders, Sterling said, cutting his meat with precision. Dirt farmers who'll work themselves to death on land they'll never own. It's pathetic. Really. Laughter rippled around the table, all except one chair. Clare Bancroft sat silent, fork resting untouched beside her plate. She'd heard this speech before, countless variations over countless dinners. Her father's contempt for working men had become background noise, like wind through shutters. But tonight something pulled her attention elsewhere, through the window, past the manicured lawn and white fence. Distant lights flickered. Homesteads scattered across the valley, small lamps burning in modest windows. One light in particular drew her gaze. Daniel Harper's place, 3 miles south. She'd met him twice now, both times in town. Both times her heart had done something unfamiliar. A man's worth is measured in acres he owns, Sterling continued, warming to his theme. These people rent dirt and call it a dream. They're beneath us, every last one. Claire's fingers tightened on her napkin. Beneath us. She thought of Daniel's hands, calloused from honest work. The way he'd helped old Mrs. Patterson carry her groceries without being asked. The intelligence in his eyes when they'd talked about books, about ideas, about things that mattered more than acres. Claire. Her father's voice cut through her thoughts. You're quiet tonight? I'm listening, Father. You disapprove. Not a question. Sterling knew his daughter too well. I'm absorbing, she said carefully. Taking in the lessons you're teaching? Something in her tone made Sterling pause. His daughter had his late wife's eyes, and right now they held the same quiet strength Margaret had shown when she disagreed without arguing. It unsettled him. Claire set her napkin beside her plate and stood. Excuse me, I'm tired. She walked toward the doorway, her footsteps measured, dignified. Sterling watched her go, watched the way she glanced once more toward those distant lights before disappearing up the stairs. An unfamiliar sensation twisted in his chest. Unease. The beginning of something he couldn't name. The guests resumed talking, but Sterling barely heard them. He looked down at his laden table, his fine china, his crystal glasses catching the candlelight. Everything gleaming, everything cold. Outside, autumn wind rattled the windows. Those distant homestead lights flickered but didn't go out. The settlement's harvest fair transformed the main square into something alive. Farmers displayed vegetables in wooden crates, their pride evident in straight rows of potatoes and perfect squash. Children ran between booths, their laughter competing with fiddle music. The whole valley seemed to have gathered, wealthy landowners mixing with homesteaders in rare equality. Claire wore her simplest dress, hoping to blend in. She'd come without her father, claiming she wanted to walk, needing air. Truth was, she'd hoped to see Daniel. She found him at a modest booth, selling produce from his farm. Carrots bundled with twine, onions in neat piles, tomatoes that caught the afternoon sun. He wore clean clothes, patched at one elbow, boots worn but polished. When he smiled at an elderly customer, something in Claire's chest tightened. Miss Bancroft. He noticed her, removed his hat. Didn't expect to see you here. I like harvest fairs, she said. All this honest work on display. His eyes caught the emphasis, and something passed between them. Understanding, maybe recognition. These tomatoes came from seeds my mother saved, Daniel said, picking one up. She always said good things grow from what you tend with care, not from what you inherit. Claire stepped closer. Inheritance helps, Daniel acknowledged. But it's what you do with your hands that matters most. They talked for 20 minutes. About his garden, her mother's old rose bushes, books they'd both read. An elderly farmer struggled past carrying a heavy grain sack, Daniel excused himself immediately, helped the man loaded onto his wagon, refused payment with a smile. Claire watched it all. This was character. She thought. This was worth. Then she heard his voice, her father's voice, cutting through the fair's pleasant noise like a blade. Claire. Sterling stood 10 feet away, jaw tight, eyes moving between his daughter and the homesteader. He approached with measured steps, each one deliberate. Mr. Harper, Sterling said, the name sharp in his mouth. Selling vegetables. How industrious. Mr. Bancroft. Daniel met his gaze without flinching. Good harvest this year. For some. Sterling turned to Claire. We should go. Dinner's waiting. I just arrived. Father. Nevertheless. The word hung there. Command wrapped in courtesy. Other fairgoers had stopped talking, sensing confrontation. Sterling took his daughter's elbow. Gentle but firm. Daniel said nothing. Didn't argue. Didn't protest. Just stood there with dignity that somehow made Sterling angrier than words could have. As they walked away, Claire heard it, her own laughter, echoing in her memory. She'd laughed at something Daniel said about stubborn roosters. Genuinely laughed in a way she hadn't in months. Her father must have heard it too, must have recognized joy he no longer provided. Sterling kept walking, his grip on her elbow steady, but Claire felt the tremor in his fingers. Behind them. Daniel tipped his worn hat to her retreating form. The gesture was simple, respectful. Sterling saw it and knew, with terrible certainty, that this wouldn't end easily. The study smelled of leather and tobacco. Sterling sat behind his massive desk, papers spread before him like battle plans. He'd been staring at them for an hour without seeing the numbers. The knock came just after sunset. Come in. Claire entered, closing the door behind her. She didn't sit, didn't approach the desk. Just stood there in the lamplight, her mother's blue eyes steady on his face. I'm courting Daniel Harper, she said. No preamble, no softening. I wanted you to know. Sterling's hands flattened on the desk. You're what, courting him? We've talked several times. I enjoy his company. He's asked permission to call on me properly. Permission. Sterling stood, his chair scraping back. He needs my permission, and I deny it. Absolutely. I wasn't asking, Father, I was informing. The words hit like cold water. Sterling felt his control slipping, felt the ground shifting beneath carefully constructed authority. This was his daughter, his to guide, to protect, to position in society as he saw fit. He's a homesteader, Sterling said, forcing calm into his voice. A dirt farmer with nothing but calluses and dreams. You're a Bancroft. Mother was a teacher's daughter when you married her. That was different. How Sterling's jaw worked. Because I had to fight for everything. He wanted to say, because I clawed my way up from nothing, and I'll be damned if my daughter slides back down. Because I'm afraid of losing the only thing I've built that matters. But he said, you're forbidden to see him. I'll make that clear to everyone, including Mr. Harper. Claire's expression didn't change. I will see him. Father. Her voice stayed level. Measured. You taught me to recognize quality. You taught me to value character over appearance. I'm doing exactly that. Don't twist my words. I'm using them. She turned toward the door, then paused. You can forbid it. You can threaten. But I'm 23 years old and I've made my choice. The only question is whether you'll be part of my life when I make it. She walked away, her footsteps fading down the hall. Sterling stood frozen, listening to her bedroom door close. The sound was soft but final, like earth falling on a coffin. He sank back into his chair, the study suddenly enormous around him. His gaze fell on the photograph at the desk's corner. Margaret, his late wife, smiling in a way that had made him feel worthy despite his rough origins. She'd chosen him when her family objected. She'd defied them for love. The irony tasted like ash. Sterling sat in the lamplight, silence pressing down. He'd built an empire of land and wealth, commanded respect across the whole territory. But tonight he was losing the one thing that mattered. And he didn't know how to fight an enemy who was his own pride. Outside his window, the autumn night deepened. Somewhere in the darkness, Daniel Harper's small light burned steady. 3 weeks passed. Clare and Daniel courted openly. They walked together after Sunday service, her hand light on his arm. They sat on her front porch in the evenings, talking until stars appeared. The settlement watched, some approving, others scandalized. Gossip spread like wheat chaff on wind. Sterling felt it everywhere. In the dropped conversations when he entered the general store, in the careful glances from other landowners. His authority was being questioned. His judgment doubted. Claire's defiance had become public. And worse, she seemed happy. That happiness cut deepest. Sterling watched his daughter glow with something his wealth had never provided. She laughed easily now, smiled at private thoughts. Love had transformed her, and it came from a man with worn boots and a rented homestead. Mrs. Brennan noticed everything. The schoolteacher widow had known both families for years, taught Clare to read when she was 6, bought vegetables from Daniel's garden every week. She watched Sterling's isolation grow, saw him sitting alone in church pews that used to fill with acquaintances, saw Clare blooming while her father withered. One afternoon, Mrs. Brennan found Sterling on the street outside the bank. "Walk with me," she said. Not a request. They walked in silence past storefronts, past people who nodded respectfully but didn't stop to talk. Sterling felt the difference, the careful distance others now kept. "You're poisoning yourself," Mrs. Brennan said finally, with pride and stubbornness. "You don't understand. I understand perfectly." Her voice was gentle but firm. "You're afraid of losing her, so you're pushing her away. You disapprove of her choice, so you're forcing her to choose between love and family." Sterling stopped walking. "He's beneath her station." "Station." Mrs. Brennan turned to face him. "Your daughter is 23 years old, intelligent, kind, raised with values you claim to hold. She's chosen a man of character, a man who works hard, treats people with respect, lives with integrity, and you're rejecting him because he doesn't own enough dirt. It's not that simple." "It's exactly that simple. You're just too proud to see it." She left him standing there, her words hanging in the autumn air. Sterling watched her walk away, watched people greet her warmly while they'd greeted him with formality. That evening, he saw them again, Clare and Daniel, walking by the creek, their heads bent together in conversation. Daniel said something that made Clare laugh. That bright, genuine sound Sterling hadn't heard directed at him in months. He went home to his grand house, his empty table, sat down to dinner served by silent staff. The food was excellent. The loneliness was suffocating. His daughter was slipping away, choosing a modest life over his empire. Part of him wanted to respect her courage. Most of him wanted to destroy the obstacle in his path. Sterling pushed his plate away, appetite gone, outside his window. The first autumn stars appeared. Cold and distant and alone, Sterling rode to Daniel's homestead at dawn. The place was smaller than he'd imagined. Single-room cabin, well-maintained but humble. A garden plot showed careful tending. Rose straight despite the modest tools. A fence needed mending, but the work was honest, visible in every weathered post. Daniel emerged as Sterling dismounted, wiping his hands on a cloth. He'd been working already, judging by the sweat on his brow. "Mr. Bancroft." No surprise in his voice. He'd been expecting this. "We need to talk." Sterling tied his horse to the fence. Inside. The cabin's interior was simple. A table Daniel had clearly built himself. Chairs that didn't match. A single cot in the corner. Clean but sparse. Everything a man needed. Nothing he didn't. Sterling reached into his coat, pulled out an envelope thick with bills. He laid it on the rough-hewn table between them. $5,000. Sterling said, "More money than you'd make in 5 years of farming. Take it and leave the territory. Tonight." Daniel looked at the money, didn't touch it. His expression stayed calm. But something flickered in his eyes. Disappointment. Maybe. Or sadness. "You're trying to buy me off? I'm offering you opportunity." Sterling kept his voice steady. "Start somewhere else. Buy your own land. Build something real. But leave my daughter alone. You're beneath her. Mr. Harper, surely you know that." "Beneath her." Daniel repeated the words quietly. Then he pushed the envelope back across the table with one finger. The gesture was gentle. Final. "I love her, Mr. Bancroft, and she loves me. That's not for sale. Everyone has a price. Not for this." Daniel stood, moved to the door, opened it. "I won't dishonor Claire by accepting money to abandon her. I won't dishonor myself by pretending love can be bought or sold. If you don't understand that, then you're right, we're not the same. But it's not me who's beneath her." The words landed like stones. Sterling felt heat rise in his face, shame and anger mixing until he couldn't separate them. He'd used tactics of a man without honor, and they'd been named for what they were. He grabbed the envelope, stuffed it back in his coat, strode to the door where Daniel stood waiting, patient and unmoved. "You'll regret this," Sterling said. "No, sir." Daniel met his eyes. "I don't think I will." Sterling mounted his horse, turned it toward home. Didn't look back at the young man standing in his cabin doorway. The money refused. His dignity intact. The ride home seemed longer than the ride out. Sterling felt the envelope heavy in his coat. Felt the weight of what he'd done pressing on his chest. He'd tried to bribe a poor man to abandon love. He'd measured everything by money and found himself the poorer for it. By the time he reached his grand house, shame had settled into his bones like winter cold. Claire discovered the truth from Daniel himself. He told her that evening on her porch, his voice steady but his hands clasped tight. Told her about the money, the demand, the price her father had placed on their love. He didn't embellish, didn't seek sympathy. Just laid out the facts with the same honesty he brought to everything. Claire sat very still, listening, when he finished. She stood without a word and walked into the house. Sterling was in his study, ledgers open before him. He looked up as she entered, saw her face, and knew. "You tried to buy him." Her voice shook, not with tears but with fury. "You offered Daniel money to leave me." "Claire." "Don't." She held up one hand. "Don't justify it. Don't explain. You tried to bribe the man I love because you think everything can be bought, including me. I was protecting you. Or from what? From happiness, from love." She moved closer to the desk, her mother's eyes blazing. "You gave me lectures about character my whole life, about integrity, about measuring a man by his actions. Then the first time I find someone who actually lives those values, you try to drive him away with money." Sterling stood. "He's not worthy of you. He refused your bribe, Father. He turned down more money than he'll see in years because he wouldn't dishonor me or himself. That's not worthy." The words hit hard. Sterling grasped for response, found nothing that didn't sound hollow. "If you marry him, you'll have nothing," he said finally. "No inheritance, no support. I'll cut you off completely." Claire's expression shifted from anger to something worse, disappointment. The look his wife used to give him when he'd failed to be the man she believed he could be. "Then I'll have nothing except love, honesty, and a man who chose me over money. While you'll have everything except your daughter." She turned and walked away. This time she didn't close the door gently. It shut with force that rattled the windows. Sterling sank into his chair, hearing her footsteps overhead, hearing drawers opening, objects moving. She was packing, preparing to leave his house for a homesteader's cabin. By sunset, half the settlement knew. By the following morning, everyone knew. The Bancroft daughter was defying her father, choosing poverty over wealth, love over station. The settlement divided. Some took Sterling's side, muttering about propriety and foolish girls. Others supported Clare, speaking of courage and true love. Mrs. Brennan watched families split along lines of belief, watched the community fracturing. Sterling stood at his study window 3 days later, watching Clare load her mother's belongings into Daniel's wagon. She moved with purpose, her chin high. Daniel helped her, gentle with the precious items, careful with her heart. The house felt enormous around Sterling. All these rooms, all this space, built to hold a family. Now holding only one proud, stubborn man who'd chosen his pride over his daughter. Margaret's photograph still sat on his desk. He picked it up, traced her face with one finger. She would have supported Clare, he knew, would have welcomed Daniel with warmth. Seen past the worn boots to the character beneath, Sterling set the photograph down and stared at his empty house, his hollow victory. Night settled over the Bancroft mansion like a shroud. Sterling sat at his dining table, the same table where he'd spoken contempt weeks ago. Now it was set for one. A single lamp burned, pushing back darkness that seemed to press from all sides. The servants had gone home. Clare had left that morning, taking the last of her belongings. The house echoed with her absence, every room reminding him of what he'd lost. Sterling looked at the food before him. Roasted chicken, fresh bread, vegetables from his own extensive gardens. His appetite had died 3 days ago and showed no signs of returning. He was losing his daughter, not to death or distance, but to his own stubborn pride. She'd be married within weeks, start a life in Daniel's modest cabin, build something real without her father's blessing or presence. He'd spend the rest of his years alone in this monument to wealth, growing old without grandchildren, dying without reconciliation. The knock came just after 8. Sterling almost didn't answer, but something made him rise, cross the empty foyer, open the heavy door. Mrs. Brennan stood there, lamp in hand, shawl wrapped against the autumn chill. "May I come in?" she asked, not waiting for response. She stepped past him into the foyer. Sterling closed the door, followed her into the dining room. She set her lamp on the table next to his, doubling the light. "You're destroying yourself," she said, removing her shawl. "And your daughter. And a good young man who's done nothing except love her with honor. You've made your opinion clear." "I haven't made it clear enough, or you'd have listened." She sat uninvited, gestured for him to sit across from her. "So I'm going to tell you about Daniel Harper." Sterling wanted to refuse, to send her away. Instead, he sat. "Last spring," Mrs. Brennan began, "the Morrison family lost their home to fire. 3 children, 1 infant. Daniel spent 2 weeks rebuilding it. Wouldn't accept payment. Just worked dawn to dusk until they had shelter again." She leaned forward. "He teaches reading at the schoolhouse every Saturday, to children whose parents can't afford proper tutoring. He sits with old Mr. Patterson twice a week since his wife died, just to keep the man company. He helped the widow Thompson deliver her calf when no one else would come in the middle of the night. Character bought by small gestures. Character proven by consistent action." Mrs. Brennan interrupted. "While you were building your empire, he was building a community. While you were accumulating wealth, he was investing in people. And your daughter saw that. She saw a man who lives the values you only speak." Sterling's hands clenched on the table. "She deserves better than a rented cabin. She deserves happiness." Mrs. Brennan's voice softened. "Sterling, I've known you 15 years, known your late wife longer. Margaret chose you when you had nothing, when her family objected, when everyone said she was marrying beneath her station. She chose you for your character, for who you were beneath the ambition. She believed in you." The name hit hard. Margaret, his wife who'd seen potential in a rough man with big dreams. Now your daughter is doing exactly what her mother did. Mrs. Brennan continued, choosing character over comfort, choosing love over approval. And you're punishing her for having Margaret's courage. Sterling closed his eyes, saw his wife's face, heard her voice telling him that people mattered more than property, felt the ghost of her hand in his. One question, Mrs. Brennan said quietly. Would you rather have your daughter happy in a modest home or miserable in a mansion? The question hung. In the lamplight, simple, devastating, true. Sterling saw it then. Saw his prejudice clearly for the first time, stripped of justification and pride. He'd been feeding himself poison for years, letting class distinctions corrupt his judgment. His daughter had chosen wisely, and he'd been too blind with pride to see it. What do I do? His voice cracked. I've threatened her, tried to bribe him, made this a public war. How do I come back from that? Mrs. Brennan smiled. The same way you built your fortune, Sterling. With courage, with humility, with the willingness to do hard things because they're right. She stood, collected her lamp and shawl. Your daughter loves you. Daniel's a good man who'd welcome peace. But you have to choose them over your pride. You have to choose love over being right. She left him sitting there, 2 lamps burning on the empty table. Sterling stared into the flame, feeling something crack inside his chest, pride falling away like dead wood, revealing the raw wound beneath. He'd been wrong. Completely. Terribly wrong. The question was whether he had the courage to admit it. Sterling rode to Daniel's homestead at sunrise, but this time he dismounted slowly, taking in details he'd ignored before. The careful way Daniel had terraced his garden for better drainage, the mended fence, each post set true despite limited tools, the small touches that spoke of pride in work, of building something lasting with patient hands. Daniel emerged from the cabin, saw Sterling, and his expression grew wary. Clare appeared behind him, her hand finding his shoulder. I came to see the place, Sterling said, to really see it. No one spoke. Sterling walked to the garden, knelt, picked up a handful of soil. Rich, well-tended, loved. The kind of earth that produced good harvest because someone cared. You've built something here, Sterling said, standing. Something real. That evening, the settlement gathered for their weekly meeting in the community hall. Everyone came, drawn by news that Sterling Bancroft had requested to speak. The room filled quickly, faces curious and concerned. Sterling stood at the front, lamplight casting long shadows. His hands trembled slightly, but his voice stayed steady. I owe this community an apology, he began. And 2 people in particular. He found Clare in the crowd, then Daniel beside her. I've spent weeks speaking contempt about homesteaders, about working men who build lives with their hands and hearts. I measured worth in acres owned. In wealth accumulated, I was wrong. The hall stayed silent. People leaned forward, listening. My daughter fell in love with Daniel Harper, a man of character, integrity, and honor, a man who works hard, serves his community, and treats people with dignity regardless of their station. And I tried to destroy that love because it threatened my pride. Sterling's throat tightened. I offered him money to leave, tried to buy his absence, his silence, his betrayal of the woman he loves. He refused with a dignity that shamed my offer and showed me who the better man was. He stepped down from the platform, walked through the crowd to where Daniel stood. The young man watched him come, Clare's hand tight in his. Sterling extended his hand. I apologize, Daniel, for my prejudice, my cruelty, my pride. You were right. It's not you who's beneath my daughter. It's me who's been beneath the man you are. Daniel looked at the offered hand, then at Clare. She nodded, eyes bright with tears. He shook Sterling's hand. Apology accepted, sir. Sterling turned to his daughter. Clare, I was wrong. About everything. Your mother chose me when I had nothing but dreams and determination. You've chosen a man with far more character, community, love. She'd be proud of you. I'm proud of you." Claire's tears spilled over. She moved into her father's arms, and Sterling held her tight. Feeling forgiveness he didn't deserve flow through her embrace. "I'd like to give you my blessing," Sterling said. "If you'll have it, both of you." "We'd be honored," Daniel said quietly. The settlement erupted in applause. Mrs. Brennan wiped her eyes, smiling. Neighbors who'd taken sides found themselves reconciled, the community's fracture beginning to heal. Sterling stood with his daughter and the man she'd chosen, feeling lighter than he had in years. He'd surrendered his pride, admitted his wrong, chosen love over appearance. Claire whispered, "Thank you for choosing us, Father. Thank you for not giving up on me." He answered. Autumn dressed the valley in gold. Leaves fell like blessing over the settlement square where chairs had been arranged in careful rows. The whole community gathered, their finest clothes pressed, faces eager. Claire stood in Mrs. Brennan's house, wearing her mother's wedding dress, altered to fit, cleaned and pressed. It carried Margaret's blessing across the years. Mrs. Brennan adjusted the veil, eyes misty. "Your mother would be so happy," she said, "both for your choice and your father's change." Claire smiled. She always said Father had a good heart beneath the ambition. Just needed reminding sometimes. Outside. Daniel waited at the makeshift altar, wearing new clothes bought with money from his best harvest. His hands were scrubbed clean, but calluses remained marks of honest work he'd never hide or regret. Sterling stood near the entrance, alone but not lonely. The settlement had welcomed him back with cautious warmth, and he'd accepted it with humility. He'd visited Daniel and Claire 3 times, brought supplies without fanfare, begun learning who his future son-in-law truly was. The music started, simple fiddle, played by the blacksmith's daughter. Sterling walked to the entrance where Claire waited. She took his arm, squeezed gently. They began the walk down the aisle together, past neighbors and friends, past people who'd watched this family nearly destroy itself and then choose healing. Sterling felt every eye on them, but he only saw Daniel. The young man's face as he watched Claire approach. Love and wonder written plain. This was what mattered. This moment of surrender, of trust, of love acknowledged and blessed. At the altar, Sterling stopped. The minister asked who gave this woman in marriage. "I do," Sterling said, his voice carrying, "with gratitude that she chose so well, and with blessing for the life they'll build together." He placed Claire's hand in Daniel's, stepped back, watched his daughter and her chosen man exchange vows in voices clear and strong, watched them promise love, fidelity, partnership, watched them become what he and Margaret had been. 2 people choosing each other against all odds. When the minister pronounced them married, the settlement cheered. Sterling found himself cheering too. Years of pride and prejudice falling away like autumn leaves. At the reception, Sterling stood to give a toast. The crowd quieted. "I learned something these past weeks," he said. "Class was costume. Character was core. My daughter chose wisely." He raised his glass. "To Claire and Daniel. May they build a life richer than any acres could measure." Everyone drank. The celebration continued, music and laughter filling the autumn afternoon. Weeks later, Sterling sat at Daniel and Claire's modest table, sharing supper. The food was simple bread Claire had baked, stew from vegetables Daniel had grown. But the warmth was real, the conversation genuine, the love evident in every glance between them. Sterling helped Daniel mend fence the next morning, learning the satisfaction of work well done. They talked while working, about crops and weather and the life Daniel was building. That evening, Sterling prepared to leave. He stood in their small yard, looking back at the cabin. Lamplight glowed in the window, warm and welcoming. Through it, he could see Claire and Daniel sitting together, her head on his shoulder. This was worth more than his mansion. This love, This peace, this life built on truth. Sterling mounted his horse, turned once more to look. His daughter had chosen wisely, and in learning to see what she saw, character over class, love over pride, truth over appearance, so had he. He rode toward home under autumn stars, no longer alone. Behind him, lamplight burned steady in a modest window. Ahead, his grand house waited, but it didn't feel empty anymore. He'd found his daughter again, found himself in the process, found that worth was measured not in acres but in love given and received. The autumn air smelled of harvest, of endings and beginnings. Sterling breathed deep and rode on, at peace for the first time in years.